సెషన్ స్టార్ట్ అవ్వలేదు, లైవ్ అయింది.
Namaste everyone. Thank you for joining us for another session of Indica Yoga. So today's Yoga Insights will feature senior yoga teacher and the director of biomes, Celia Roberts. Celia ji runs the Biomedical Institute of Yoga and Meditation in the foothills of Brisbane in Australia, and she reaches a global online audience with yoga and meditation teacher training. She invites people from all walks of life to merge science and spirituality for the betterment of their health and well-being, to ultimately have a deeper insight and know true compassion within. In this session, Celia ji will talk about the gut microbiome, which is perhaps the most important to all other biomes in the body. Through meditation, yoga, asanas, pranayama, sattvic food, and self-enquiry, we begin to digest the present moment and heal the physical digestive tract. Amazingly, these days, we all have all of this ancient wisdom completely backed up by research, and this session will highlight all levels of digestion. Namaste, Celia ji. Thank you so much for joining Indica Yoga for this session of Yoga Insights. Welcome. So I'm going to hand over the session to you now, and I'll see all of you towards the end when we open for Q&A. Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you. So welcome everyone. My name's Celia. I'm from Australia, and I have travelled to India a few times now, and I hope to live there again one day. So thank you for joining me from the other side of the world. I have a long-term interest in yoga and Ayurveda, and have studied Ayurveda in Australia, which I don't think is anything compared to India, but I have been trained under an Ayurvedic doctor and really value what I've been taught by him. I also have studied a biomedical science degree, so my interest is always merging yoga, Ayurveda, and biomedical and biopsychosocial science. So this means that everything affects our digestion, our biology, our genetic history, our mother, our father, our genes, our epigenome, the biome that was passed down to us by our mother and also our father, and all those close to us around when we were young and even now. And I suppose I just have this deep fascination in how the science really complements what we've known for 5,000 or more years. So I'll begin with that, and because this is titled How Our Thoughts Shape Our Digestion, I'd like you to just contemplate now what you normally think about your digestion. Yeah, do I have good digestion? Do I have bad digestion? Do I have an upset belly? Is my belly not so good? You know, what is it that you really think about your digestive processes? So I'll just give you 1 minute now just to contemplate that. What is it that you think about your digestion and how you digest life, the moment in front of you? How do you label your digestion to your doctor, to your family, to your friends? How do you talk about your digestive processes? And it's probably really important, just coming away from that contemplation now and that method of self-inquiry, to recognize that our thoughts absolutely shape our digestion. So if we are, for example, feeling anxious about something, we often know that our belly might be upset. If we feel flattened or low, that we might not notice that our digestion is a bit subdued. But I think it's also important to recognize that we mentally digest life as well. And so if we're not mentally digesting the moment that is arising here and now in front of us, then our digestion's affected. And so we know if we are suffering from anxiety or stress, immediately the digestion goes out. Now we can see this scientifically. We can see that 90% of the serotonin, which is what makes us feel alive and happy, is produced in our guts. And that's incredible. Yeah. And serotonin is produced from food, from our mood. It's produced from our exposure to sunlight. It's also produced from massage and even remembering the good times. So it's a whole process that creates good mental health. And just so that you understand, we have a long nerve, the vagus nerve, that travels from the cranium or the brain, down through the neck, down through the ribs, innervating the diaphragm, and then all the way down into the digestive system. Now we know that the messages aren't necessarily traveling from the brain down, that they're traveling from the body up. And it's not 50-50. So to be very clear with you, if we are getting messages along the vagus nerve, they're traveling up, and 90% of them are coming from bottom up, is what the scientific word we say. So the scientific word we use is called bottom up processing, as opposed to top down processing. So our thoughts shape our digestion, but also our emotions shape our digestion. And that's really important because our emotions tell the truth far more than thought alone. And I'm quoting a great spiritual teacher in the West of our time, Eckhart Tolle. So in terms of coming into touch with what's really going on in our body, it's not our thoughts that we're listening to as a form of inquiry or self-inquiry, it's our emotions. And so what we need to recognize is that when our body feels an emotion, without really thinking about it, we might be reaching for certain foods that may or may not be helpful to us. Now, going back to the science, we also know that GABA is produced in the gut, and GABA is called gamma aminobutyric acid. Now, this is a calming neurotransmitter. We see that through yoga practice, we can increase this calming neurotransmitter. We can also see through through taking in fermented foods, which is new biomedical science that has been researched by the Food Medicine Institute in Australia, that we start to increase GABA as a byproduct of digesting fermented foods. Now, for those of you who understand Ayurveda, fermented foods are not necessarily considered sattvic. So we are then mixing, something that we might kind of say, this is modern science that doesn't match with what we once believed through that system. And we would say that fermented foods are not part of the sattvic diet, but as a therapeutic tool for someone who might be affected by anxiety, panic, depression, PTSD, then GABA is a really important neurotransmitter that we want to increase from the belly up, and we can do this through fermented foods. Now, to give you an example of what might happen to someone who has lowered GABA in the system, they might have panic disorders, and we see that panic disorders start to increase when we have a lowered GABA rate in our brain and thalamus by about 22%. So we see that increased panic disorders and anxiety goes up, and also chronic pain or acute pain, as well as PTSD and depression, like I mentioned. Now we see these being lowered in the prefrontal cortex and the thalamus, which sits just above the spinal cord in the brain. And like I said to you previously, we can see that if we ingest certain foods, particularly fermented foods, we can see at this point in time that we can increase the byproduct, or the byproduct of the fermented foods is GABA, which is a naturally occurring calming neurotransmitter that puts our body at rest and at ease. Now, this is really important because we can also do this through yoga and meditation. And so this is called vagal GABA theory. So we can see that people with depression really benefit from the increased GABA, and scientists link this to vagal GABA theory. So they're saying that the GABA travels by the vagus nerve and affects the brain as a theory, because they're not sure why yoga is so effective at increasing this calming neurotransmitter at this point. So that's a good example of how the vagus nerve works, and is a super information highway between our gut and our brain. Now in Ayurveda, we have known for such a long time that our mental digestion is equally as important as our physical digestion. So whatever we're eating, fine, no problems, yeah? And we definitely see in Western science that if we want to treat a client with any mental health disorder, in fact, that changing their diet will have the greatest effect within the shortest time frame, as opposed to psychology, counseling, or any other intervention, even exercise. So we see changes within 2 weeks that are reasonable, but the moment somebody ingests some element of food, the biome is already changing. So I suppose it's important to recognize that Ayurveda has always treated digestion first. It's the primary place where we go in and we help someone and they're right. You guys are right. India's right. They've been doing it so wisely for such a long time. And to also credit Chinese medicine here as well, we have seen that fecal matter, the Chinese, this sounds a little bit disturbing, so brace yourself, but the Chinese have for a long time eaten poo soup as a therapeutic thing to do, and to heal the microbiome and any health conditions that might be out of balance. And an amazing Australian researcher called Professor Thomas Borody, he invented the fecal matter transplant. And so he did this for ulcerative colitis and mental health disorders. And we can see that if we take a healthy human sample of fecal matter and either feed it through with capsules or ingest it upwards through the anal tract, that we can actually change the person's microbiome to a healthy one. And these studies have been done in rats over and over and over again. So if we take the unhealthy microbiome of an anxious rat and place that into a healthy rat, then that rat will eventually get anxiety or depression or obesity, depending on how the microbiome has been transplanted from one unhealthy rat to another, and vice versa, from a healthy to another. So it's really important to recognize that these ancient traditions are wise. Yeah, the Chinese have been doing this for thousands of years. Yeah, and now science is catching up, and that's wonderful, because it just shows us that we've been way ahead of ourselves for a really long time. I feel that it might also be important to recognize that some of our breath work that we use in yoga also stimulates dopamine in the system, and this is also something that's really important if someone was feeling tamasic or low or depressed. So we might use some breaths like Kapalabhati, skull shining breath, through the nose, and that lifts basal metabolic rate. Yeah, so we're taking someone from tamas to rajas and eventually to the sattvic state. For those of you who haven't heard of this, polyvagal theory, which is all based on vagal tone and the vagus nerve, actually writes a paper that combines the three gunas with polyvagal theory. So we take someone from depression, shutdown, freeze response, melancholia, to rajasic state, so sympathetic flight or fight, and we can do this through yoga, we can do this through Surya Namaskar, sun salutes, we can do this through fast breathing, breath of fire and Kundalini yoga, perhaps Surya Vedana, so the right nostril breathing as opposed to left. So anything that stimulates the sympathetic nervous system and lifts someone out of this kind of mental capacity where everything's low and tamasic and into the rajasic state. And then finally into the sattvic state. We call this polyvagal theory. So this is by Stephen Porges, and you may have heard of it. Now, what he calls it is shutdown to flight or fight to compassionate engagement. And there are some very fancy terms like dorsal vagal response to ventral vagal to compassionate engagement and ventral vagal response. But for now, it's just really good to kind of go, wow, here is science using polyvagal theory to explain something that we've known for a really long time. And it's highly possible that in time we're going to have the proof to say, tamasic foods, rajasic foods and sattvic foods affect the mental state in the way that we've always understood in Ayurveda. So dopamine is another way that we can kind of measure what might be going on in vagal tone. Also endorphins, we notice travel upwards towards the brain via the vagus nerve, and norepinephrine and epinephrine, so adrenaline as well. And we can increase adrenaline and cortisol for someone who might need that lift in a really healthy way by doing things like power posing in yoga. So Virabhadrasana, Warrior 1, Warrior 2, and there's been research on this. So we can elevate the arms, lift the mind, just like you would on a sporting field if you want to race. And we see that we lift adrenaline, lift cortisol, it only takes 60 seconds, and we would increase pain tolerance by 20 seconds by just kind of lifting up and elevating. Now that's amazing, yeah? So we're taking someone from the tamasic state and into the rajasic state, and then eventually into the sattvic state by just posing differently. So again, I'm just explaining this because these these elements of our we could say inner pharmacy are incredibly attainable. And so if we feel low, we just have to change our posture, perhaps our food, perhaps our breath, and also our state of mind, which I'll go on to talk a little bit about now. So I think it's really important to understand how thoughts shape our digestion. And I'd like to show you this short video by a researcher who I find her work is incredible. And her superior researcher, Dr. Ellen Langer, is the mother of mindfulness, who's been studying mindfulness in the Buddhist tradition for up to 40 years. So you'll see that she's coming from a background with a Zen priest as a father, and mother of mindfulness, Professor Ellen Langer, as a sort of background. So she's fascinating, and I'll do a screen share now. If anything goes wrong, I'll explain the study to you with my own words. Okay. Right, here we go.
Our minds aren't passive observers, simply perceiving reality as it is. Our minds actually change reality. In other words, the reality that we will experience tomorrow is in part a product of the mindsets we hold today. Our mindsets come from many places. Our mindsets about stress come from our upbringing and the words of encouragement we may or may not have heard. Our mindsets about what it means to be fit and beautiful are a product of the cultures that we live in. Every day, marketing and advertising shapes our mindsets about what is good, worthy, or exciting to eat. And influential doctors and health scientists have an uncanny authority to craft how healthy we expect ourselves to be. I study mindsets like these and how they impact our physical health. Thousands of clinical trials have shown that simply taking a sugar pill under the impression that it's a real medication can reduce not just our anxiety and pain, but lower our blood pressure, boost our immune system. Placebos work not just by making us say we feel better, but by triggering, activating a whole host of specific neurobiological effects. Holding the mindset that a pill or medication will relieve your anxiety, for example, activates the body's parasympathetic nervous system. The power, of course, is not in the sugar. The power comes from the social contexts that shape our mindsets in ways that activate our body's natural healing abilities. And the dirty secret of all clinical trials is that once the trial is said and done, the placebo effect remains, not as something to be subtracted or ignored, not as some magical or mysterious response to a sugar pill, but the psychological and social foundation, the support system on which the total effect of any drug or therapy is placed. These principles apply to health behaviors as well. Hotel room attendants, for example, get a substantial amount of physical activity throughout their day of work, but typically don't think of their work as good exercise. What we found in our research is that a simple shift in mindset, from the mindset that their work is just work to the mindset that their work is good exercise, produces physiological changes in the body. After just 4 weeks of adopting the mindset that their work is good exercise, hotel room attendants lost weight and lowered their blood pressure by 10 points. What this means is that objective health benefits, things like a healthy heart and a healthy weight, depend not just on what we're doing, but what we think about what we do. The same is true for food. In this study, we gave people the exact same milkshake, but with two very different labels. What we found is that when people thought they were in the mindset that the shake was indulgent and caloric, their body's hunger hormone ghrelin dropped at a 3-fold rate, speeding up their metabolism and leaving them feeling physiologically satiated. So how does this work? How do mindsets influence our health? Take these two mindsets about stress, for example. The truth is that both of these mindsets are possible, but the rub is that the mindsets we choose to hold influence the outcomes that will result. Mindsets change what we pay attention to. Mindsets change what we're motivated to do. Mindsets change how we feel and expect to feel. And mindsets change what our bodies are prepared to do. Through cascading effects on these psychological, behavioral, and physiological mechanisms, mindsets can create the reality that's implied. In other words, having the mindset that stress is enhancing, ironically, is what makes those enhancing effects more likely. So as influential leaders and decision makers, it's essential to recognize that mindsets are not peripheral, but central to health and behavior. If we truly want to tackle the diseases and crises of our time, we need to more effectively acknowledge and leverage the power of mindset. Thank you.
Okay, so I gather that you all heard that well. Let me know if that was otherwise. But I think the most important thing that we'll extract here and now from what Dr. Alia Crum has just showed us from her milkshake study, which is just purely incredible. So often in our world of health, and particularly a lot through the people I tend to see, is they're already very, very, very healthy. You know, they're already looking after their health. So sometimes it's not the diet that we're looking at changing, but also the mindset. And I find this a really interesting study, and it's one that brings up a lot of debate in the classroom of both mindful eating, yoga and Ayurveda, and the scientists within us. Because what she's saying about the milkshake is, if you're presented with a milkshake that is labeled as unhealthy, you know, highly caloric, delicious, that your ghrelin is, you're going to actually be less satiated far more quickly than the milkshake that was labeled as healthy, and yet they're exactly the same milkshakes. So what she goes on to say is that the science of enoughness, or really feeling that we've had enough and that we have enough in our lives, is really important. And I'll demonstrate this in the other study she spoke about. So she spoke about hotel workers, and they were reporting that they didn't have much job satisfaction and they weren't getting much exercise. So within 15 minutes, they educated these hotel workers and said, your job's amazing. You're getting so much more exercise than the average population. You know, you're upstairs, you're throwing sheets around, you're cleaning, and you saw how many calories they were burning, and they were educated on that. And then they saw within 4 weeks from 15 minutes of education that they lost weight, their blood pressure improved, their mental health improved, and they had some significant markers that really showed these people have become healthier from 15 minutes of education to practice their job on a daily basis within 4 weeks and lose weight and get better mental health. So it goes to show us that our thoughts shape our digestion, and it's not just about food. And I feel as anyone who's interested in health, we really need to understand that. So if you think you have poor digestion, or your digestion's not good enough, or perhaps you're really reaching for the most healthiest food all the time, you may have this idea that you're not getting enough, and your whole body is listening to that. So we call that psychoneuroendocrine immunology, which is a big word for mind affects body and emotions affect mind. Yeah. So our immune system and our endocrine system and our nervous system are listening to those thoughts. So you also heard her talk about stress, and we also know that mental digestion, like I mentioned previously, is very, very important in Ayurveda. And, you know, we can have cake and eat it and feel incredibly guilty about it and not satiated at all, because our mindset is that it's terribly bad for us and it's awful. But it means that we're still eating the cake a long time after we've actually eaten. the cake. And so that doesn't really lead us to digest the cake at all, because our thoughts about it are so negative. But perhaps if you just ate the cake mindfully and really enjoyed every morsel of it with a great sense of enoughness and contentment, it might be the best thing that you do for yourself all day, because it might lead to you eating a little bit less, which might be good for you a little bit later on throughout the day. But she talks about stress, and that's really important to our mindset as well. So if we think stress is bad for us, it will be. But if we see stress as something that lifts adrenaline and increases cortisol and gets things done, help us present, increases productivity, then by all means, stress can be wonderful for our system and get us out of all sorts of funky mindsets that might lower or the mind into tamas, or even lift us out of rajas and into a more sattvic state. So we understand that our stress is eustress, and it's really actually great for us, and it helps us perform our dharma or our path in the world. And for sure, at times we're going to have good stress in our systems that is going to help us perform our job as parents or teachers or whatever it is in our work life. And so it's really wonderful if we can acknowledge the stress and really embrace it wholeheartedly as a function of our humanness, to get us up and out in the world. Because if we didn't have that, we would be in a tamasic state. And some of my clients in the deepest, darkest states of depression might be unable to function for a week or 3 weeks due to states of deep despair. So yeah, stress for some of us can be a really wonderful state to be in, and that's good to remember as well. So it brings up the debate. Let's say tonight I go home, or you maybe later on in your evening in India might have a lovely sweet for dessert. You know, you might have a chocolate or something that's meaningful to you, and you might have, if you've bought it from the store, something that's labelled as really healthy. You know, in Australia we have vegan, organic, no animal products whatsoever, or we have Lindt chocolate, delicious, wonderful, fatty and everything, everything, emulsifiers and everything. And I suppose in our sattvic mind, and the hatha yogi might be really interested in delivering the most purest food, but you did see in that milkshake study that sometimes if we're going in with that sense of lack, that we will feel unsatiated. And so that's also a good thing to start to think about. Now, it's an interesting debate because our society, particularly in the West, suffers from non-communicable diseases such as obesity. And if we see rats in a cage, for example, and they are delivered health food versus high caloric fast food, for example, chips and food that's unhealthy, they'll always choose the more unhealthy option, the high calorie food. So it's a survival technique. So there's a cleverness to us. We've kind of trained ourselves through wisdom and science to know, well, this actually does benefit me more, but we have to meet it with a mindset as well. This is not coming. I'm choosing these healthy foods with a sense of enoughness and gratitude and wholeness, that these foods feed my soul, and that sometimes it might be okay to have something that's not incredibly healthy for us, and that too will feed our soul. So it takes us into the science of enoughness and the art of contentment. So Dr. Alia Crumb's work spans a lot of fields, and tonight I've just shown you a very short video and spoken about exercise, stress, and diet or food. And what she says from all her research, with also Dr. Ellen Langer, the mother of mindfulness, Professor Ellen Langer, is that the sense of enoughness is really important. The sense of enoughness is really important. So for example, if you treat clients or you know your own mind very well, you might notice And I'd be interested to know, perhaps at the end of the discussion, if this is a common thought in India, because it certainly is in the West. It's very, very common to our minds in the West. Yours might be slightly different. But people often feel not good enough, not good enough. I'm not good enough, yeah? And so everything we do in our diet and our exercise almost mimics that thought. This isn't enough and that's not good enough. And I haven't done enough exercise today. But what the hotel worker studies show us is that if we really look at, well, I've walked the stairs, I've cleaned the home, I've swept this, I've taken care of my children, I've lifted them up the stairs, or I've been on a short walk or a long walk, really acknowledging that as enough, and even, you know, the amount that we do is really important, is really relevant to our overall sense of well-being. So what it shows us is that present moment awareness and the bliss of being here and now with enough all the time is incredibly important, incredibly important. Now, it goes on a little bit further. So we have these senses of I'm not good enough, or I'm so good, or I, you know, the I thought is a big thought. And that's where we could, of course, reduce the I thinking and all this mental chatter down to I am, or even beyond that, silence, nothing. So this thought of I'm not good enough, I'm too good, or I'm too fat, or I'm too skinny, or I'm little at my body, blah, blah, blah. All of this is affecting our digestion. We can see that. But once we start to reduce the thoughts and we become the witness, the perceiver, the observer of the mind, like we see in the Yoga Sutras 1.3, we start to recognize that there's another state of mind that science is starting to study, and this is called a meta mindset. So I've heard Dr. Alia Crum refer to it, and Professor Khalsa, who studies yoga in the USA and is absolutely incredible, has been doing his work over the last 20 years, calls it metacognition. So meta mindset or metacognition. Now this is a space that is of mind that is beyond thought. So we could perhaps refer to this as the bliss of being, Satchitanand, where we can see or a compassionate presence, to quote Paul Gilbert, or a compassionate state of mind, Professor Paul Gilbert, who studies compassion focused therapy, a state of presence or mindfulness where we can see these thoughts, these difficulties arising on consciousness, but we don't attach to them. Oh, there's the I'm not good enough thought. Oh, there's the I'm too fat, I'm too skinny thought. But you're not necessarily engaging in the thought. You're either, one, using your breath to bring the default mode network, the noise in the background, offline, and to put the blood flow to the prefrontal cortex here, moving it away from all of this at the back, the parietal and occipital lobes, to concentrate here. And that means we lose our sense of self and time and space. So we go, oh, this thought again. Breath or mantra, either will do the same. So we've got breath and mantra. We could flip the thought and we could look at it from a method of self-inquiry. Oh, I'm not good enough. Oh, I'm too good. You know, and whose thought is this? Hold on. Who is the I thought anyway? And Sri Ramana Maharshi would often teach us that method of self-inquiry. Who is the I that is thinking this thought? So that self-inquiry is Svadhyaya, and forgive me if my pronunciation's a little bit incorrect there. But that self-inquiry is often referred to in Western medicine as CBT. And so we use mindfulness CBT in pain reduction, but we use CBT all the time, which is cognitive behavioral therapy, which really has its roots in self-inquiry. So we can use that as a technique. So we've got breath, mantra, or self-inquiry, Svadhyaya. And then we've flipped the thought as another way of sort of entering into that self-inquiry mind, or we can really love the thought in the field of, you know, loving everything, as in everything is God, and if this thought comes in, then I lovingly accept the thought from the field of compassion or loving awareness. This thought is part of who I am. It's part of the world around me. It is Brahman, it is everything. So I accept the thought rather than trying to deconstruct it or wish it away or bring my attention to the breath or mantra. So you've really got to choose what works for me: breath, mantra, self-inquiry, or loving the thought. And I usually give those techniques to my students and clients, actually. So it's very important to recognize these thoughts that we're having about our bodies and ourselves are affecting us on so many levels. And we have many, many levels of mind-body medicine research where we can see, okay, it's not just my microbiome that's being affected by these thoughts and my emotions. So we call that, remember, top-down processing, where our thoughts affect our digestion, and our emotions and our bodily sensations, we call this bottom-up processing, where whatever's going on down here affects our mental thoughts, which then again affect lower. We know that our thoughts, our anxious thoughts, might affect our heart rate variability, and our heart rate variability is a really big predictor of mental health. It's probably important to recognize that the way we breathe, through our nose or even breath holds, kumbhak, when we breath hold, this affects our microbiome. It's important to recognize that the people that we hang out with, the people that we go and be with, they affect our microbiome. So Professor Thomas Borody, the one who I told you about, who developed fecal matter transplants, he often says, go to your local swimming pool. And sorry, this is he also told me about the Chinese poo soup doctors who used to treat thousands of years ago, but go to your local swimming pool because this is a great way of staying in contact with much fecal matter. I don't know, because I believe that chlorine works, but he definitely says that. He also invented crapshoes, so he's very funny, and that's slang for poo in Australia, crap. So forgive my rudeness, but he often gives the fecal matter in capsules, and so he calls them crapshoes. So socializing is really important, and I think all of you might know this by now, but if you don't, breastfeeding is really important, and a vaginal birth where possible for the microbiome of the child. Our mother's microbiome is really important to us, but also our father in the first year of life, or anyone who gives caregiving. The other thing that might be important to recognise is that if you can, Dr. Rob Knight, who originally started doing this work, and this might be not possible for all of us, but you can have the idea of going out to a farm. So I live on a farm here, lots of acres, much acres. We run a retreat centre. So, and you have 2 dogs, and I have 2 dogs, and in India, dogs, you don't always want to have contact with every single dog in India. I do understand, because they're running wild, but we have 2 dogs, live on a farm, and try and get in contact with the earth as much as possible. So this affects the biome. And it's probably important to recognize that Rob Knight also says that the microbiome is actually far more important than the epigenome. So our thoughts are constantly affecting our epigenome, and our stress levels are constantly affecting the epigenome. So we see that we can reverse any growth on the telomeres. So we have telomeres, which are like shoelaces, and I wish I had a shoelace to show you, but I'll see if I can pull something apart here. So imagine you have a shoelace, and on the end of the shoelace you have that little cap, that little rubber bit, and a telomere sits on the end of the DNA, and when we're aging, telomeres start to shorten. When we've had stress, or we've been smoking for a long time, or poor diet or abuse in our lives, the telomeres will shorten. But we see through the work of Dr. Dean Ornish that through yoga, meditation, good diet, social connection, great family, great relationships, good lifestyle, good environment in which you live, that the telomeres actually lengthen. So the yogi is truly immortal. We can lengthen our lifespan, and that's incredible. That really is incredible. And so what we also need to recognize is the microbiome is far more important than the epigenome. So your karmic fate in your genes that are passed down from generation to generation, they don't matter as much as the microbiome of the mother, yeah? But what we do see, which is really fascinating, what the research is currently showing us, is that the father has way more of an impact on the mental health of a child than the mother. So the father and his genome has far more of an impact on the mental health of a child, usually in mental health disorders, than the mother. And that's related to the epigenome, yeah? But the mother passes down heart rate variability, which is a marker of mental health and therefore physical health and also digestive health, as well as the microbiome of the gut, to the fetus in utero as well. Now, our gut microbiome is not limited to the gut. So just in case you have never heard this, we have an eye microbiome, we have ear microbiome, we have a nose microbiome, we have a mouth microbiome, and we have a skin microbiome, and we have our sexual organs, which also have microbiomes as well. So it's really important that we keep all our microbiomes functioning well. And we have techniques in Ayurveda that cleanse and look after all the channels, yeah? So even our eyes, our ears, yeah? And so it really is important to recognize how this ancient modality has worked so well for such a long period of time for us. I might just check the time and see if there's any questions, because we are starting to near time. And whilst I do that, I might see if I can share a document with you as well, just to, yeah, please let me know, Sophia, if you have any questions come up on the screen.
That's fine. We have one question already. And if we're opening for questions, any participant who might want to have who have any questions, just type them in. We have one from Lataji already, who's asking you to share the link of the video scenes that you've shared.
For sure. Would you like me to do that now or just at the end?
That can be put in the chat box.
Right. Okay. I'll do that now. For sure. She's wonderful, and yeah, plenty more of those as well. We could watch another one which makes her work just a little bit more understandable if you'd like, but see how we go for questions, and then we can keep going as well.
So while that link is happening and while you all think of any more questions, I'd just like to remind everyone that these sessions are recorded. So if you'd like to come back and revisit everything that Celia ji has just spoken about, or if you would like to share any of this information, please do so. The video will be available on the Indica Yoga website, the Indica Yoga social media channels, as well as the Indica Yoga YouTube channel. Celia ji has put her... Okay, so I'm just gonna put that in the chat box so everyone can have access. Lataji, the YouTube link is now in our chat box. I don't see any more questions yet. So Celia ji, meanwhile, can you share your email address or website with us? So if any of our participants would like to get in touch with you.
Yeah, that's great. I suppose probably the most important thing to recognize is that it's just not all about food, is it? We have to really look at the way we are thinking about food, because we can put the healthiest foods into our body, but if we don't actually think about the way we digest food and also how we're digesting life, then it can often be a little bit more difficult to make our health work for us in the way we're hoping. So I do have a document as well. I'm just going to see if I can share that, but I'll definitely put this up now. Let me know if there are any more questions. And
yes, Jayanti ji is asking, you spoke of various examples where change in mood was affected in minutes, but Ayurveda never speaks of a medium-term change in health due to change in diet. How do we reconcile the two?
Okay, I just missed the last bit. So I understood that changes in minutes to the microbiome, but the second part of that question, would you mind reading that out for me again?
She said you spoke of various examples where change in mood or biome was affected in minutes, but Ayurveda never speaks of a medium-term change in health due to change in diet. So how do we reconcile the two?
So actually, the research shows that it's in 2 weeks that we see significant changes through nutrition over psychological counseling or exercise or any other intervention. So it's a significant change in the data. It doesn't mean that it's a long-term change. It just means it was the fastest working intervention to change the diet, to change mental health. So there's no need to reconcile it. What I did say is, just to give you an example, is the microbiome's always changing. So the moment that we ingest any particle of food that's, new to the body or not, the microbiome will be working on that. We're feeding the bacteria of our gut a different food or a different substance or the same. So it's constantly changing all the time. In fact, I feel the microbiome, because it links all of us together on so many levels, including linking us to the earth. And all of them, 90% of our body is made up of microorganisms. I think it really teaches us the science of interconnectedness, or the spiritual realization of interconnectedness as well. Like, there is nothing that we can't take into our bodies that won't change that microbiome. And all our microbiomes, our vaginal microbiome, our mouth microbiome, our nasal microbiome, the air we breathe, for example, will be constantly changing the nasal microbiome. The way maybe if we don't get sleep, the eyes get dry, or if we drink too much coffee, for example, the eyes get dry. So that will be changing, the water content of the eyes. So the kapha will be reduced, and the pitta will be increased, and the vata will be increased. And so then the microbiome of the eye will be changing. Does that make sense? I hope that answers the question.
Thank you so much. We have a whole bunch of questions now. Akanksha ji is asking, what does digesting each moment in life mean?
Oh, that's such a good question. Thanks. So I feel that we're constantly in the past. Our mind is like, it's like a movie. It's projecting that image. Oh, that might happen. That terrible thing might happen in my life. I don't want that to happen. Oh, I want that. I don't want that. And so we miss the moment. Yeah. I think we can all agree that if we're wanting this and not wanting that, and this is all based on memories and then anticipation, we're memorizing our past, and we're saying, I don't want that in the future. And I don't want that. Oh no, I do want that house and that car, and I do want my partner to give me a hug, or my husband to give me a hug, or whatever. So we've got all of those memories and anticipations going on. And so we're not digesting the moment that's in front of us. And so there's no way our digestion can function well if we're not present, because we're anxious about the future based on the past, or we're sad about our future, or sad in our body currently because we're thinking always about the future. And so we need to start to look at how, and therefore this also, if we look at it scientifically, sets up a big cycle of craving and desire. I want this, I want that. And it can go for food as well, or drugs, or alcohol if you're smoking, whatever, eating too much of one food. So we're craving a desire, and then sometimes we get the reward and we get a little hit of dopamine. Yeah. And if we don't get the reward, we get a massive drop. And think about how many times in your life you've gone, I want that, and you didn't get it. Like, that's a massive drop in dopamine. And when you do get it, you get a lift, and sometimes it's a big spike. And so we're constantly in this cycle of, I want that, I don't want that, I got that, I didn't get that. And so that means that we're not digesting the present moment, because we're never present, because we're caught in this cycle of addiction, craving, and desire. And so once we're caught in that cycle, it means that we're never satiated, and we're never digesting the moment that's in front of us, and therefore this is affecting our digestion. So we're not assimilating. I would say the best way of putting it is samanavayu. There's not that assimilation and digestion and nourishment and absorption of the moment and the food that we're taking in. And it's incredible that we have this incredible power that takes in life to our body and digests it and gives us life back. And if we miss that energy, that prana, that life force that's within us, because we're here thinking about what we want over there, then our digestion's really poorly affected, because we want that and we're not actually noticing, well, I've got this and this is enough. And so it's that science of enoughness is the art of contentment. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I'm going to combine two questions because they're the same question from Akanksha ji and Kishore ji. They're both asking about the impact of fermented foods according to Ayurveda and if this is good for health.
Yeah, they're saying, is it good? It is good for health, or okay, so yes, I mean, in Ayurveda, it increases pitta, too much pitta. So yeah, it's definitely something I have grappled with over the years as well. And it's not sattvic to take the fermented food. So, but the research is showing that the fermented food will increase GABA as a byproduct, which is a calming neurotransmitter. And fermented foods in small amounts have been shown to be really helpful for people's mental health. If you've ever had gut difficulties and severe gut difficulties, I have personally noticed, because I did have something wrong with my digestion for a period of time that was based on getting something that the medical system was finding hard to treat from bad water. So I found that the fermented foods were actually very detrimental. I could feel the fire in the food. It was too hot and it would hurt my belly a lot. So from personal experience, I can say that if the client says that this causes harm and they already have a very hot digestive system, so too much pitta in the system, or pachaka pitta is out of balance, then we shouldn't, I believe that sattvic is best and not to include the fermented foods. But yes, the research is leading towards fermented foods, which have been used for thousands of years in many, many traditions, you know, Japanese, Chinese, and definitely all throughout the West, have some benefit. And maybe it would be interesting to know, if there was research to come out, is the biome culturally, you know, benefited by the fermented foods? Because we do know that if we're Japanese, for example, and we go and eat a lot of dairy, that can be really harmful to our system, or a lot of alcohol, because they don't have the gene that helps, they don't all have the gene that helps digest it. So maybe our digestive system in the West is more accommodating of fermented foods, but maybe in the East, not so. It'll be interesting to know that in the future. But yes, have a look at the research. I will send you the link for the woman who talks about that, of the Food Mood Institute, Professor Felice Jacker, and I'll put that in the chat box, and so you can have a look at her research. It's fantastic, and she runs the Food Mood Institute at Monash in Australia. Yeah. Any other questions? Food Mood Institute in Australia. And so if you look up her website, her research is good, and we'll talk about fermented foods quite a lot. Oh, Sophia, I've lost your sound.
Okay, sorry. So Gaurav ji is asking, he's saying thank you for this presentation. And his question is, do you suppose children process healthy but not palatable foods given their averse response to them?
Do they process healthy but not palatable foods given
like
their
broccoli or spinach, given their averse response to them?
Yeah. And do you mind repeating the question just so I've grasped the whole question,
He
Sophia?
said, do you suppose children process healthy but not palatable foods given their averse response to them? So will they process a food if they're averse to it, even though it might be healthy?
Yeah, I would say no. Yeah, I think it's a complicated question without science to back it up, because my Ayurvedic mind steps in and says, well, if they're not digesting the food and it's difficult for them to digest it, and we do have things in spinach like oxalic acid as well, which can make a food hard to digest. And in the West, we eat a lot of kale at the moment, and that food can be actually quite harsh on the stomach. So if the person is having a lot of trouble digesting a certain particular food group, and particularly spinach or kale or the cabbage family with a lot of oxalic acid, maybe the system is saying, no, this isn't for me, or the microbiome's just not up to it. And so if we want to change the microbiome very, very gently, sometimes you can just start to bring small amounts of the food back in. But some of the other interesting research as well of Dr. Alia Crumb's, and I'm just going to have to try and recall this with food allergies. So I'd highly recommend looking this up, Dr. Alia Crumb, food allergies in children. So she's done some interesting research where she changes the education around the food allergy. And once she changes the education around the food allergy, then the allergy starts to dissipate for the child. So I'm going to write that in the chat box for you to look up as well. So it's Food Intolerances by Dr. Alia Crum. And once she re-educates the child over a certain period of time, I think it's 6 weeks, and it's with peanut butter, so some pretty extreme allergies, the child then starts to sort of say, oh, the peanut butter, the small amount I had was really good for me. And now I know that when my immune system's reacting in that way, it's actually reacting out of stress, which is good for me rather than it being bad. So she changes the mindset so that they can react well, and then the body also reacts in a similar fashion. So they start to believe that the stress means that their immune system's fighting off something good, and they believe the immune response is excellent for them, and so slowly the food intolerance decreases. So I'm going to put that in the chat box now, and Sophia, if you had any other questions, please let me know. So that's Dr. Alia Crum, Food Intolerances in Children.
We just have a comment from Jayanth Ji, who's saying he loved the presentation and agrees with everything you've spoken about. Thank you for watching, Jayanth Ji. And the last question we're going to take is from Professor Nirmal Gupta, who's saying, what do you think about the use of chemicals and genetically modified foods on mental and physical health?
I feel if we can avoid it, we should, but if we can't, then we change our mindset. Yeah, so if we can start to just see this is, if we can avoid it, we should, but if we can't, then we don't worry about it. We definitely don't worry about it, because the more we worry about it, the more our digestion is affected. And worry is based on the past and projected into the future, and the worry will cause us more disharmony than the food itself. Yeah.
Thank you so much. That's all the questions we've had. Thank you so much for patiently answering all our questions and for this beautiful session. And just to remind everyone, all the links that Celia Ji spoke about, all the doctors and books she recommended, it's all in the chat box. I've added all of the links, etc., and all of you can access it from there. And also in the chat box is her website, biome.com.au, and admin@biome.com.au is the email, which you can also go through the chat box and take. Before we sign out, any advice you'd like to leave us with?
I feel presence is required when we're eating, sleeping, and working. Presence is required in all that we do, so that we can watch the mind and let it gracefully shape our present moment. Thank you, Sophia.
That's a beautiful message to leave with. Thank you so much. And just to remind everyone, this session is recorded, so you can always come back and look at it and share with everyone you know. Thank you so much, Celia Ji, for taking the time to do this and for this session with Indica Yoga. And thank you everyone for joining us. And just to remind everyone, our next session on Ayush Talks by the Center for Ayurveda Studies is going to be on Wednesday, 7th June, same time, 4 to 5 p.m. So I'll see all of you then. Thank you so much for joining us. Namaste.
Namaste. Thank you. Take care.